Have you said thank you once?
You think that if you will speak very loudly about the war,
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country's in big trouble.
Even the natural order of political positions in Australia seem to have been upended by the extraordinary events in the White House 4 days ago. This morning, the Prime Minister had a very different message on Ukraine to the one he has very carefully taken for some months, at the cost of being criticised for being weak on such issues, signalling he was open to joining the coalition of the willing, being spearheaded by the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer.
There's discussion at the moment about potential peacekeeping, and from my government's perspective, we're open to consideration of any proposals going forward. Australia has historically played an important role in areas including in Africa, in Cyprus, in a range of peacekeeping areas. We want to make sure that the illegal, immoral actions of Russia are not rewarded, and that Vladimir Putin and his designs, which are imperialistic, not just on Ukraine but on other countries, are not rewarded or encouraged.
For once, the Prime Minister seemed to be taking a more assertive foreign policy position than the opposition leader.
In terms of whether we should have boots on the ground in Ukraine, I don't support that. I think the Europeans have that task.
With regard to the US is an important ally of Australia. That remains the case. It's an alliance between our nations. With regard to Australia's foreign policy, Australia determines our foreign policy. We do it in Australia's national interest, and it is in Australia's national interest to stand with Ukraine, and that's what my government is doing.
It's one thing for the Europeans to stand up for Ukraine, but another for Australia, particularly given the past caution about taking a different position to President Trump on almost anything. And while the government's language may reverberate in Washington, at home, opinion polls pointing to a likely minority government suggest views on the crossbench may need to be taken into consideration. The MP for Goldstein, Zoe Daniel, says it is time for some plain talking with our ally.
I don't think it's sustainable to just hope that this situation will go away and that we can walk on eggshells around Donald Trump for the next 4 years in the hope that he won't impose tariffs on our key exports because we defy him in some way.
Not everyone has been quite so diplomatic, like West Australian Premier Roger Cook.
JD Vance is a
knob.
In the United States, there is now an increasing focus on the domestic political and economic cost of the Trump modus operandi. President Trump's approval ratings have been on a steady decline since his inauguration, and his aggression towards Canada has brought Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party back from the political dead ahead of the Canadian election. A share market shocked by Trump's tactics, as well as his move on tariffs against Mexico and Canada, sold off sharply this morning, with the Nasdaq falling 2.6%. American business and consumers are being made anxious about the real-world cost of Trump's international aggression. The impact of the second Trump presidency on Australian politics comes through the potential economic threat of tariffs, its impact on our strategic outlook, but also through its influence on the nature of language and tactics used domestically. There are still Trumpian echoes in some of the political strategy being taken by Peter Dutton's coalition, including a further escalation in his targeting of the public service as a source of waste and resentment.
There are public servants at the moment in Canberra who are refusing to go back to work, and they're being paid in some cases over $200,000 a year. And I just think people here who are struggling, some families who have taken up second and third jobs just to pay their mortgage under this government. Any Australian, let me know if it's more efficient for you to deal with the Canberra bureaucracy having 36,000 more public servants.
For its part, Labor is focusing its policy messages on very traditional topics like education.
This will provide a $4.8 billion injection from the Commonwealth into New South Wales public schools over the next decade. This is the largest ever federal injection of funds into New South Wales schools ever by any government.
Back in the foreign policy zone, Zoe Daniel says recent events show Australia has to think more broadly than the US alliance.
With the mercurial behaviour of the US president, we do have to make alternative alliances, and those alliances are likely to lie in Europe. If our plan A, or indeed our only plan, has been to align ourselves with the Americans, we need to think about whether that plan is still fit for purpose. And to be clear, I'm not saying we don't need that alliance. Of course we do. It's critically important that we continue to have a relationship with the US. But at the moment, we really have all our eggs in one basket when it comes to AUKUS, our national security positioning, and indeed even the way that US troops rotate into Australian territory, for example.
How does Daniel see the crossbench influencing foreign policy in a minority government?
So part of my role as a member of the crossbench is to call out uncomfortable truths that the major parties don't want to, and to provoke conversations about things that they're not really keen to have. And as you know, AUKUS, for example, is bipartisan policy, and I think for that reason it's had very little scrutiny, and anyone who's put their head up to criticise it has been shot down within the public arena. With the direction that the world is going in right now and the shifting nature of the landscape, it's a conversation that has to be had.